Hello, my name is Amanda Knox, and this is my conversation with installODD.
Hi, and welcome to my interview with Amanda Knox, a name the world knows from the Netflix documentary. But today we look beyond that. We talk about truth, identity, and what it means to be seen as a person, not a headline. So let's dive in. And hi, Amanda.
Hi.
The Hulu series, A Mirror or a Mask? You're not just portrayed in the twisted tale of Amanda Knox, you were also part of its creative production. How did it feel to switch from being portrayed to shaping the portrayal yourself?
It was very validating. I think the way that who I am, was twisted and tortured into this caricature is one of the very real traumas that I experienced. Having my identity stolen from me and being able to reclaim that has been very validating. And I think it's also a really interesting turning point in the entertainment industry that has historically taken advantage of and exploited other people's life stories and worst experiences without their consent or collaboration. And so I think this is potentially a turning point or a leveling up in the entertainment industry to reconsider the idea that somebody who is a source can also be a creative collaborator.
Was there a moment in the script or on set that hit you emotionally harder than expected?
I think that I was ready and anticipating that the scenes that we were portraying in the show were going to be really impactful. Actually, something that was more impactful than I expected that wasn't exactly a scene was just the sets, like really walking into, you know, a recreation of my prison cell, or especially the recreation of my house where I was living with Meredith and my other roommates. That really hit me in a big way because, I never really got to say goodbye to those spaces. And, I never even got to collect my belongings from my apartment. And so going back inside and seeing everything perfectly recreated, like Henry Dunn, the set designer, really meticulously recreated everything down to like the socks that were hanging on the drying rack. Like, it was surreal. And I spent a good amount of time on set just grieving and mourning and saying goodbye. And that was really, really emotional.
Why did you agree to do the series now? Was this a step toward healing or a way of reclaiming narrative control?
I think the fact that I became a mother was no small part of the decision. Like, when I got pregnant, I felt a great amount of responsibility to find closure, find peace, get my head around what was this story, what was this horrible experience, and what did it mean to me, and setting the record straight, certainly. But also it was a matter of the right people at the right time, right? Like, at the point that Monica Lewinsky, a friend of mine and mentor, reached out to me to do the series, I also happened to be in communication with my prosecutor and finally doing something about this horrible thing that had happened to me and so many other people that said something about who I was. Like, up until that point, this was just a bad thing that happened to me and other people that I had nothing to do with. And so it didn't really feel like my story. And it wasn't until I started reaching out to my prosecutor and making steps to confront him in person that I really finally felt like a story of how do we overcome trauma? How do we reclaim our lives and reclaim our freedom when that has been taken away from us? And that, I feel, is what my story is all about. So that's what I felt comfortable portraying in the show.
You once suffered from the machinery of media storytelling. What was it like to work with that machinery now on your side? Cameras, scripts, edits, but your voice in the room.
Yeah, well, this isn't the first time that I have worked within the media, right? Like, one of the big takeaway lessons of this experience is that storytelling, and particularly storytelling in a mass media way, is a very, very powerful and impactful um, way to communicate. And it requires a great amount of skill and accountability and integrity. And so it's not necessarily that the media is bad, it's just powerful. And when it's in the wrong hands or when it's got bad incentives behind it, it can lead to really devastating consequences. But ever since I've come home, I've invested in storytelling as a storyteller myself. I worked in a newspaper. I did I did series, I did reporting for Vice and various other entities. And so this isn't my first entrance into media per se. It is my first time working on a dramatization of a real story, and with that comes, again, responsibility. But I think that as someone who has been on the other side of that lens, I brought not just authenticity to the experience, but also sensitivity and a great desire to make sure that the story that we told was a human story. It wasn't like a black and white morality tale. And what I've seen in the past with wrongful conviction stories is they tend to be portrayed in very black and white terms. And I think that that's to the detriment of the truth and to the detriment, honestly, to the movement of advocacy that I belong to. So, yeah, it was very reassuring, actually, to be a part of like a great village of people putting together this creative project and not having that responsibility just be on my shoulders alone anymore.
Some critics say the series is too forgiving. What would you say to those who claim you're using it to clear your name?
Oh, that's so funny that some people think that, because I've had the opposite reaction where people are like, you're too forgiving to your prosecutor. And I think that just goes to show that, like, the series is really concerned with contextualizing and humanizing people and not with vilifying or villainizing them. It's really interested in understanding the like universal human truths that we can experience, like that we can recognize in the people who find themselves at the center of these really, these perfect storms of injustices and tragedies. And so, no, I don't. I think that's an interesting take, but no, I think everyone involved was treated very fairly, much more fairly than they've been treated in the past.
If you could preserve just one scene from the series, one that you feel is deeply true, which would it be?
I mean, definitely the interrogation scene was very important for me to get right, both from a factual standpoint and from an emotional standpoint. I think a lot of people do not understand how someone could be coerced to implicate themselves in others when they are completely innocent. And I've never seen it portrayed accurately on screen before. And so that was my deepest concern. And if there's any scene that I hope people will remember and will remember from the series and like carry with them, it is that scene.
My search for meaning. Your new book doesn't rehash the case. It's about meaning, identity, and becoming. What made you want to write it now after so many years of telling your story?
Yeah, so when I wrote my first memoir, I wrote it when I was still in the thick of going through this experience and proving my innocence and fighting for my freedom. And so it was a very different book. It was a very like practical, this is what happened kind of book. And it wasn't memoir in the sense that I hadn't yet had time to process what this experience meant and what are the big implications of having lived a life like the one that I had lived. And so I think that, when I look back on now 2 memoirs that I've written, my first is just answering the question, what happened? And the second one is asking the question, well, now what? And so what? And what is it about this experience that is universal and that we can all, like, what are the hard-won truths and wisdoms that I learned the hard way that are applicable to anyone? And most especially that question of freedom. What does it mean to be free? That's a concept that is like so fundamental, and yet it is so abstract and theoretical, and we think we know what it means to be free, but when that is challenged, how do you reclaim that very slippery and elusive idea for your own life? And the idea that you can be trapped in your own life even if you're technically free is a really, I think, universal feeling. And so one reason I wrote it is because I process my thoughts about all of this and my feelings through writing. But another reason was because I was driven by a desire for human connection. You know, I was really ostracized and exiled from humanity by this experience. And I'm a person who feels a desire to be connected with other human beings, and being vulnerable and sharing my experience is a way of reconnecting with humanity again.
Many readers call it brave because it doesn't offer answers, just difficult, honest questions. Which question from the book still haunts or challenges you personally?
Well, I mean, the main antagonistic question in the book is, how do we feel and what do we do about the people who harmed us, right? And like, how do we understand that? And how much should we take personally, and how much is it not about us at all, even though we deal with the consequences of other people's bad actions? And that question, what to do with that, has been one of the great challenging questions of my entire adult life, is what do I do about that? Especially when my antagonists were very much empowered and encouraged by a lot of people to commit harms against me and to continue committing harms against me. And so that sticky question of, on the one hand, how do we hold others accountable? And on the other hand, how do we contextualize and humanize them is a tricky problem that I feel like I've taken a lot of steps and taken a lot of risks to understand, but I can't say that I'm a complete expert at it. And, you know, in my book, I show an example of what you can do, what I did. I don't necessarily recommend my path for other people, but it does like open up the idea that maybe connection and understanding is possible where it is seemingly impossible, and what are the like healing benefits of taking actions like that are counterintuitive.
Was there a thought or memory that surprised you during the writing, something you'd never fully processed before?
I think that one chapter, it still like surprises me that every time I reread the chapter, it makes me cry. And it's the chapter where I talk to my younger self when I thought I was going crazy, and I started imagining a younger version of myself in the cell with me, and I talked to her about what was going to happen to her and how she was going to survive it. And it was a way for me to sort of like psychologically big sister myself through the experience. And I was surprised by, like, to this day, how much that emotionally impacts me, because, you know, I look back on my 20-year-old self who's doing these like mental gymnastics to try to be okay through a very hard time. And I wish that I, now 38-year-old me, could go back and comfort her and take care of her, and I can't. And I just remember how alone I was and how hard that was.
Trauma, identity, and self-perception. Are there forms of guilt that linger, not judgical, but emotional?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I absolutely grapple with survivor's guilt. You know, there's two young women went to go study abroad in Italy, and only one of them survived to tell the tale. And with that comes a level of responsibility, and I feel conflicted about it, um and at the same time I feel like I'm very lucky to be alive, and so that definitely propels me forward. But you know, the knowledge that I came very close to being killed as well, and that somebody I knew who was very young and had her whole life ahead of her was her life was stolen in such a brutal and horrific and senseless way. Like that's something that will, you know, trouble me and haunt me for the rest of my life. And I think that anyone, you know, like even if none of the bad things that had happened to me in Italy didn't happen, like just that fact of like a girl that I was living with gets raped and murdered in her own bedroom, like that would be a trauma that I would be grappling with forever, you know.
What does forgiveness mean to you? Not toward others, but toward yourself.
Yeah, I mean, when something bad happens to you, you at least for me, there's this impulse of self-blame. Like, how could I be so vulnerable, or how could I be so stupid, or you know, how could I be taken advantage of? And it makes you it challenges your ability to trust yourself and to trust your ability to navigate the world and protect yourself. And over again, I experienced ways that I made mistakes, and they led to me being taken advantage of or exploited or hurt. And so that was really painful. And I think that like learning to contextualize the people who harmed me and attempting to understand them and feel compassion for them was really great practice for me, being able to do that same kind of compassion and empathy work for myself. And um and it helps, like, also knowing that I'm not the only one who has ever gone through something like this, or who's ever been like coerced into implicating themselves and others in a crime. Like, I'm one of many victims of a similar like interrogation tactic, and so it also helps to not feel alone, um, and it leads me to be able to forgive myself and cut myself slack for being a young person who didn't know any better.
What would you say to someone who's been stigmatized in private ways, who feels unseen or misjudged?
Mm. A lot of people reach out to me asking questions like that. And my biggest piece of advice is, one, don't take it personally. The vast majority of the time, if someone is accusing you of something you didn't do, or accusing you of being of a way that you really aren't, it is their projection onto you. Like they've got something, they have something in mind that they are projecting onto you, and you are having to like face the consequences of whatever fantasy or fear they are projecting onto you. So like, don't take it personally, and instead feel curious. Like, I think that when people project negative stuff on you, it's very easy to respond by thinking, oh my God, like my life is over, or now I don't have any options, or just this is just bad. This is all bad. And I think that one thing that going through this experience has taught me is that there are good things that can be derived from seemingly just bad things. And so if you don't immediately feel the like impulse to react, and instead take a breath, to just be curious, to listen, and to imagine something bigger than this small situation that you're in, it can give you a sense of agency in the situation and make you feel less reactive and more proactive.
public memory, true crime, and story ownership. You're still a constant presence in the world of true crime, especially online, in YouTube videos and TikToks. How do you feel about this ongoing visibility, especially in content that never asks for your input?
Well, I don't think that this story solely belongs to me or Meredith or any of the other people who were involved. I do think that this story is in the public interest, and so I don't begrudge anyone who is interested in analyzing it and interpreting it from very different lenses. The only thing that's frustrating about that is how much misinformation is out there. And so as long as like we're dealing with actual truthful information, like I'm perfectly happy for anyone to use this story and this experience in order to get some kind of wisdom or understanding or a better comprehension about the world. Like that's a good thing for us to learn from mistakes. I think the more sticky question is, when are people just exploiting a scandalous story for the sake of scandal, or when are they spreading misinformation? Like that's another thing that happens in the true crime space, and if people are not careful, they're intentionally or unintentionally guilty of doing that. So I think that I don't necessarily think that the true crime genre is bad per se. I think that it can be bad when it's not dealing with truth, or it's not really considering what are the stakes for the people involved.
Do you see any true crime formats that feel respectful or even healing? Or do you feel the system is inherently exploitative?
I don't think that the system is inherently exploitative. And in fact, I think even some of this like true crime stuff that even I like cringe at sometimes, does, like, CrimeCon, for example. It's a convention for true crime aficionados. That's also a gathering place for people who are looking for resources to help find like missing people, like missing family members. So like none of these things are necessarily good or bad. I do think some true crime media is better and way better than others. And again, it all comes down to how truthful, what is the bigger reason for its being? Is this just like dredging up yet another story of a horrific thing that happened to people, or are we trying to like learn something from it? Like there are good reasons to look at these cases, and then there are just bad exploitative like macabre reasons for being interested in retelling these stories. So I definitely pose to creators and consumers alike, like what is the reason? What is the point? Why are we doing this? And letting that be like making sure that people have a clear understanding, and that they're not just indulging in other people's worst experiences.
Meaning, legacy, and the right to be. What does freedom mean to you today? Not just physically, but deeply and spiritually.
I mean, so I write about this in my book, that being free requires that you see the world clearly, so that you can actually respond in the way that so you're actually free to respond in a way that says something about who you are. And I think that seeing the world clearly really requires a lot of generosity and reflection, and being able to see a bigger picture than is typically framed for you. And so, yeah, being able to see the world clearly and react to it freely from a place of clarity is what I interpret freedom to mean. And that doesn't have like And what that means, though, it's more of like an internal freedom than an external freedom. The external circumstances will be what they are, and you can still be free within those external circumstances as long as you are internally able to interact with those in a way that speaks to your own agency.
So thank you for taking the time to listen, not just a story, but to a person behind it. If you value honest conversations like this one, please support the channel by subscribing and sharing this video. Every view helps to keep stories like this told with respect and truth. So thank you for watching and goodbye.